The day Daniel lost his company, his house, and every dollar in his account, everyone disappeared. His business partners vanished. His friends stopped answering calls. Even some family members avoided him. But one person refused to leave. At first, it happened quietly. A missed phone call, an unanswered message, a canceled lunch meeting, then another, and another. Within weeks, the people who once filled Daniel's life with promises, handshakes, and laughter seemed to fade away as if they had never been there at all. Just a year earlier, Daniel had everything many people spend their entire lives chasing. He was successful, respected, and admired. His business generated millions of dollars in revenue. He owned a beautiful home in a wealthy neighborhood. Expensive cars sat in his driveway. His calendar was packed with invitations, networking events, and social gatherings. Everywhere he went, people wanted a piece of his attention. Then, almost overnight, it all came crashing down. The company he had spent years building collapsed under a series of devastating setbacks. Contracts disappeared. Debt piled up. Investors pulled away. The financial pressure became impossible to survive. Before long, the business was gone. The bank accounts were empty. The house was taken. The lifestyle that once seemed permanent vanished piece by piece. And that's when Daniel learned a lesson that would change his life forever. The people who celebrated his success could not be found during his struggle. Yet while everyone else walked away, one woman made a choice that nobody expected. She stayed. She stayed when there was nothing left to gain. She stayed when the future looked uncertain. She stayed when even Daniel himself began losing hope. What happened next would become a story of loyalty, sacrifice, heartbreak, and a decision years later that left an entire room speechless. Before we go deeper into this incredible story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because years after losing everything, Daniel would rise again. The wealth would return. The success would return. The people who abandoned him would return. But when they did, Daniel made a choice that stunned every single one of them. And the woman who stayed when he had nothing would soon discover that her loyalty had changed both of their lives forever. To understand why Daniel's story resonated with so many people, you first have to understand the life he was living before everything changed. For most people in his city, Daniel represented the American dream. He wasn't born into wealth. He didn't inherit a successful company. Everything he had built came through years of determination, long nights, calculated risks, and an unwavering belief that hard work would eventually pay off. And for a while, it seemed like it had. By his early 40s, Daniel owned one of the most respected consulting firms in the region. What started as a small operation had grown into a thriving business employing dozens of people. Clients trusted him. Competitors respected him. His reputation opened doors that many entrepreneurs spend decades trying to unlock. Success touched every part of his life. The home he lived in sat on a quiet street lined with beautiful properties and perfectly maintained lawns. It was the kind of neighborhood people drove through and imagined living in one day. His garage housed vehicles that reflected years of achievement. He could afford vacations most families only dreamed about. Financial stress was something he hadn't thought about in a very long time. But perhaps the most noticeable thing about Daniel wasn't his wealth. It was the people. Wherever Daniel went, he was rarely alone. His phone constantly buzzed with messages. Friends invited him to dinners. Business associates wanted meetings. Former classmates suddenly reappeared after years of silence. Everyone seemed eager to maintain a connection with him. At the time, Daniel believed it was because he had built meaningful relationships. What he didn't realize was that many of those relationships were connected to something else entirely. Whenever someone needed advice, they called Daniel. Whenever someone needed an introduction, they called Daniel. Whenever someone faced financial trouble, they called Daniel. And Daniel almost always helped. Family members frequently approached him with requests for loans. Friends needed assistance starting businesses. Acquaintances sought investments, recommendations, and opportunities. Daniel rarely turned people away because he genuinely believed that success meant lifting others along the way. The more successful he became, the more people seemed to gravitate toward him. At family gatherings, relatives spoke proudly about his accomplishments. At community events, people praised his generosity. Conversations often centered around his achievements and future plans. To an outside observer, It looked like Daniel was surrounded by a loyal support system. Yet among all those people, there was one person who stood apart from everyone else. Her name was Sarah. Unlike many of the people in Daniel's circle, Sarah had little interest in status or appearances. She wasn't impressed by expensive cars. She didn't care about luxury neighborhoods or business awards. She wasn't chasing opportunities, introductions, or financial favors. In fact, many people barely noticed her. Sarah lived a simple life. She worked hard, stayed humble, and preferred meaningful conversations over attention. While others admired Daniel's success, Sarah paid attention to something entirely different. She paid attention to Daniel himself. She listened when he spoke. She noticed when he was exhausted. She remembered details others overlooked. When Daniel celebrated victories, Sarah was happy for him. When he faced challenges, she was there long before anyone else knew there was a problem. Their relationship wasn't built on money, influence, or public image. It was built on trust. And because Daniel's life seemed so secure, nobody thought much about what that trust would eventually mean. Most people looked at Sarah and assumed she was fortunate to be with a successful man. They saw the lifestyle, the opportunities, and the comfort that surrounded Daniel's world. From the outside, it appeared she had every reason to stay. What nobody understood was that a day was coming when every one of those reasons would disappear. The wealth would disappear. The business would disappear. The house would disappear. The friends would disappear. And when that moment finally arrived, Sarah would face a choice that would reveal who she truly was. Many people believed Sarah was lucky to be with a successful man. None of them knew she would soon become the only reason he survived. For years, Daniel believed that if he worked hard enough, planned carefully enough, and stayed committed to his vision, he could overcome any obstacle that came his way. Then the economy began to change. At first, the warning signs seemed manageable. Industry reports showed slower growth. Consumer spending started tightening. Businesses that had once expanded aggressively suddenly became cautious. Many entrepreneurs noticed the shift, but few expected how quickly conditions would worsen. Daniel was one of them. His company had weathered challenges before. Market fluctuations were nothing new. Like many successful business owners, he believed the downturn would eventually pass. He reassured employees, encouraged clients, and continued moving forward. But what started as a slowdown soon became something much larger. Projects were delayed. Contracts were postponed. Revenue began shrinking. The numbers that once gave Daniel confidence now kept him awake at night. Still, he pushed forward. Then came a devastating blow. One of his company's largest clients, responsible for a significant portion of annual revenue, announced they were ending their partnership. The decision arrived without much warning. Years of business relationships disappeared with a single conversation. The financial impact was immediate. The loss created a hole that couldn't easily be filled. Daniel spent weeks trying to secure replacement contracts. He attended meetings, made calls, and reached out to every connection he had built over the years. Some conversations ended with promises. Others ended with silence. Nothing produced the results he needed. As uncertainty spread, investors began growing nervous. Questions turned into concerns. Concerns turned into doubt. And doubt quickly turned into panic. People who had once praised Daniel's leadership suddenly wanted reassurances he could no longer provide. Investors started pulling back. Financial commitments disappeared. Confidence in the company's future weakened with each passing month. The pressure intensified. Debt began accumulating faster than revenue could replace it. Bills arrived daily. Payroll obligations remained. Operating expenses continued growing. Every morning seemed to bring another financial problem demanding immediate attention. Daniel refused to surrender. He convinced himself that one breakthrough could change everything. One major contract, one investor, one opportunity. That was all he needed. To keep the company alive, he began making sacrifices. He took out loans, then more loans. He used personal assets to cover business expenses. He liquidated investments he had spent years building. Savings that once represented security vanished almost overnight. Still, it wasn't enough. As the situation worsened, Daniel became consumed by the struggle. His days started before sunrise and often ended long after midnight. Meals were skipped. Sleep became rare. Every waking moment revolved around finding a solution before time ran out. The burden followed him everywhere. Even at home, his mind never seemed to leave the office. Sarah noticed the change long before anyone else. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes. She heard the strain in his voice. She watched him sit awake late into the night, staring at financial reports while the rest of the world slept. The confident man she knew was carrying more weight than he was willing to admit. Again and again, Sarah encouraged him to slow down. She reminded him that his health mattered. She reminded him that no business was worth destroying himself over. She reminded him that asking for help wasn't weakness. But Daniel couldn't accept that. He believed the company could still be saved. He believed one more effort, one more sacrifice, one more sleepless night might be enough. Every time Sarah expressed concern, Daniel gave the same response. He told her he could fix it. He told her everything would be okay. He told her he just needed more time. But time was becoming the one thing he no longer had. Then came the day Daniel had spent months trying to avoid. The day every entrepreneur fears. The day every sacrifice, every loan, every desperate attempt finally collided with reality. The calls stopped coming. The opportunities never arrived. The numbers no longer worked. And after years of building the company from the ground up, Daniel was forced to face a truth he could no longer escape. The business was finished. The company he had devoted his life to had collapsed. And as devastating as that moment was, Daniel had no idea that losing the business was only the beginning of what was about to happen. The collapse of Daniel's company was devastating. But what followed was even worse. Over the next several months, the life he had spent years building disappeared piece by piece. The business officially closed its doors. The accounts that once held more money than Daniel ever imagined were frozen. Bills continued arriving while opportunities became harder to find. Then came the loss of his home. Walking away from the house was one of the hardest moments of his life. Every room held memories. Every corner reminded him of better days. Yet there was nothing he could do to stop it. Soon after, the vehicles were sold. The lifestyle that had once attracted so many people was gone. And as everything disappeared, so did many of the people around him. Friends who used to call every week suddenly became impossible to reach. Messages went unanswered. Invitations stopped coming. Conversations that once lasted hours ended in minutes. Even some family members grew distant. The same relatives who once praised his success now spoke about his mistakes. The same people who had sought his help seemed uncomfortable being associated with him. What hurt Daniel most wasn't losing the money. It was discovering how many relationships had been tied to it. One evening, sitting alone in a small apartment, Daniel stared at his phone. Hours passed. No calls. No messages. No one checking on him. The silence felt heavier than any financial loss. For the first time, he began questioning everything. His decisions, his future, his value as a person. And during those moments, when many people expected Sarah to leave, she made a different choice. She stayed. She stayed when there was no luxury home. She stayed when there were no business awards. She stayed when the future seemed uncertain. Instead of criticizing him, she comforted him. Instead of reminding him of what he had lost, she reminded him of who he was. And one night, when Daniel struggled to hide the disappointment on his face, Sarah looked at him and said something he would never forget. "You lost money, Daniel. You didn't lose yourself." At the time, Daniel didn't fully understand the power of those words. For the first time in months, Daniel began looking forward instead of backward. He knew he couldn't rebuild the life he had lost overnight. The company was gone. The money was gone. The reputation he once relied on had been shaken. But Sarah's words stayed with him. "Because I loved you before the success." Those words gave him something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. One afternoon, while researching opportunities and speaking with former contacts, Daniel came across a small business idea. It wasn't exciting. It wasn't the kind of opportunity that would make headlines. In fact, many people would have overlooked it entirely. But Daniel saw potential. More importantly, he saw a chance. The idea required very little capital, but even that was a challenge. Their finances were stretched to the limit. Starting over felt risky. Yet when Daniel shared the idea with Sarah, she listened carefully. And then she did something that left him speechless. She offered the remainder of her savings. It wasn't a large amount of money. In fact, it represented nearly everything she had left. There were no guarantees, no promises, no certainty that it would work. But Sarah believed in Daniel when almost nobody else did. With that support, Daniel got to work. The early days were difficult. Potential clients rejected his proposals. Meetings led nowhere. Some weeks produced no results at all. There were moments when it seemed like history might repeat itself. But this time, Daniel approached things differently. He stayed patient. He stayed focused. And most importantly, he refused to quit. Day after day, he worked long hours building the business one small step at a time. Slowly, things began to change. A client signed on. Then another. A referral led to an opportunity. An opportunity led to growth. For the first time since losing everything, progress was finally visible. The road ahead was still uncertain, but something important had happened. Daniel was moving forward again. And with Sarah standing beside him every step of the way, the future no longer felt impossible. What started as a small opportunity eventually became something much bigger. The business Daniel built from scratch began gaining momentum. The clients kept coming. Referrals increased. Revenue grew steadily. What had once been a desperate attempt to rebuild his life was turning into a genuine success story. Then came expansion. Daniel hired employees. He opened new opportunities. The company reached markets he had never imagined during those difficult days in the small apartment. Year after year, the growth continued. The business became larger than the one he had originally lost. The financial security returned. The stress that once kept him awake at night was replaced by possibilities and plans for the future. And through every stage of that journey, Sarah remained exactly where she had always been, by his side. But as Daniel's success returned, something else happened. People started reappearing. The phone that had once been silent suddenly rang again. Old friends reached out to reconnect. Former associates wanted meetings. Relatives who had been absent for years suddenly remembered birthdays, holidays, and family gatherings. One by one, familiar names began showing up again. Some claimed they had always believed in him. Others spoke as if they had never disappeared at all. Daniel listened politely. But he remembered. He remembered the unanswered calls. He remembered the empty inbox. He remembered sitting alone when nobody wanted anything to do with him. Most of all, he remembered who had stayed. The contrast was impossible to ignore. When he had everything, people wanted access to his success. When he had nothing, almost everyone walked away. Now that success had returned, they wanted back into his life. As invitations, messages, and requests continued arriving, many people wondered what Daniel would do. Would he welcome everyone back with open arms? Would he forgive those who disappeared during his darkest days? Or would he remember exactly who abandoned him when he needed them most? The answer would soon leave everyone stunned. The answer came on a night that nobody would forget. Years after losing everything, Daniel stood on a stage receiving one of the most prestigious business awards of his career. The room was filled with executives, community leaders, investors, and many of the same people who had watched his remarkable comeback. As Daniel walked toward the podium, the audience applauded. Most expected a familiar speech. They expected him to talk about strategy. They expected him to talk about leadership. They expected him to explain how he rebuilt a successful company from the ground up. Instead, Daniel began talking about failure. He spoke about the day his business collapsed. He spoke about losing his home. He spoke about the nights he couldn't sleep and the fear he felt when his future seemed to disappear. The room grew quiet. Then Daniel talked about something even more painful. He talked about the people who disappeared, the friends who stopped calling, the associates who vanished, the relatives who became distant. Many people in the audience lowered their eyes as they listened. Then Daniel paused. For a moment, the room was completely silent. And that's when he turned his attention toward Sarah. She was seated near the front of the audience, unaware of what he was about to say. Daniel pointed toward her. He explained how she worked extra hours when money ran out, how she sacrificed her savings when he had no options left, how she believed in him when almost nobody else did. He spoke about the small apartment, the difficult months, the moments when he questioned himself, and how Sarah never walked away. By now, many people in the audience were visibly emotional. Then Daniel delivered the words that nobody in the room would forget. When I had money, everyone stood beside me. When I had nothing, only one person remained. The room fell silent. Not because people disagreed, but because they knew it was true. And what Daniel revealed next would leave the entire audience stunned. The audience thought Daniel had finished, but he had one more thing to say. As the room remained silent, Daniel looked toward Sarah and revealed a secret she didn't even know he was about to share. Over the previous months, he had quietly updated every major company document, every ownership agreement, every corporate filing, every legal record connected to the business they had rebuilt together. And beside his name was Sarah's. The audience gasped. Some people applauded immediately. Others simply sat in stunned silence. Daniel explained that the company may have carried his vision, but it survived because of Sarah's loyalty. When everyone else left, she stayed. When he lost faith in himself, she believed. When he had nothing left to offer, she gave everything she had. The success they enjoyed now wasn't his alone. It belonged to both of them. As emotions filled the room, Daniel left everyone with a message that perfectly captured the lesson of his journey. Many people will celebrate your victories. Few will survive your failures with you. Treasure the ones who stay when there's nothing left to gain. And perhaps that's why Daniel's story continues to resonate with so many people. Because wealth can attract attention. Success can attract admiration. But hardship reveals who truly cares. If this story touched your heart, like this video, subscribe, and tell us in the comments who stayed with you during your hardest season. And remember, sometimes the most valuable person in your life is the one who stayed when everyone else walked away.